Well, good morning. Thanks for having us. Allison and I got talking, and she said, you know what I think would be so helpful for our members is to kind of hear about creation and development of affordable housing, kind of the process from beginning to end. And so that is the result of the slides we're going to go through with you today. Just a couple of things. We're going to spend some time on more slides than others. But we did want to put them in the packet. Allison said, please feel free to just reach out to her if you want a copy of the slides, or you can reach out to any of us. Because we wanted you to have them for your reference in case you wanted to go back and look at anything. There's also tons of information on our website, housingnm.org, and we're happy to follow up with anyone after, or they can give you our card and have a further in-depth one-on-one discussion. And we're gonna try and get through the slides here and leave time for questions, but we also realize we're the only thing between everybody and lunch, so we'll get going right away here. So we're just gonna briefly do an overview of MFA for those of you that may not be familiar with us, talk a little bit about the benefits of affordable housing. We included some picture examples in the packet. Again, we're not gonna spend a lot of time on those, but you know, we know that affordable housing can be harder to sell in some communities more than others, and we really like to include examples of what our affordable housing development looks like, because I think it shatters a lot of people's misconceptions, because they're quite nice amenities, and very desirable places to live. And then we'll go into the Affordable Housing Act, some helpful tips, and then I'm gonna turn it over to our development team. And they're really going to tell you how to prep and give you an insight into what the developers are looking for as you do that. So just real briefly, we're the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. We were created by the state legislature. We're a self-supporting quasi-governmental agency. And we fund literally programming across the entire housing continuum. Everything from homeless shelters all the way to down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers. So we have over 30 programs and over 300 partners statewide, and that includes everything from nonprofit, human service, service providers, lenders, developers, real estate agents, local and tribal governments. One thing that we wanted to just hit on is, you know, everybody throws around this term affordable housing, but what does that actually mean? And so the Housing and Urban Development HUD defines housing as affordable if a household pays 30% or less of its income for housing costs, including their utilities. And so just two statistics that I want to share with you is in New Mexico, there's over 117,000 households that are considered housing cost burden, meaning they pay between 30 and 50% of their income on housing. And there's another 100,000 households that are considered severely cost burden in our state. And so that's paying 50% or more of their income for housing. And the last thing that I wanted to share is that we have a shortage of about 32,000 units for extremely low income renters, which means they make less than 30% of the area median income across the state. One thing that we did want to include, again in the packet, is just, you know, when you're talking about affordable housing with your community, the benefits of economic growth. We know for many of our communities, right, we want to retain and attract new employers to our communities, and so I think it's important to tell that story as well. And then just wanted to, hopefully this will work. Just show you a few examples of different housing around the state. We really encourage our developers to get out in the community and have those community conversations and work with the local community partners and share their story, share what amenities are going to be involved, if any supportive services for families and households are included in the affordable housing development. So the Affordable Housing Act, again, was passed by the legislature, and it was a way to allow cities, towns, villages, and counties to make a donation of affordable housing, and we'll talk just a second about what it means to make a donation without getting afoul of the anti-donation clause. And so you'll see under the Act, state, counties, municipalities, and even school districts can be considered eligible donors under the Act, and eligible donations allowed under the Act towards affordable housing include land or an existing building, providing or paying for infrastructure up to the affordable housing development site, providing financing, and abatement of locally imposed fees. So how do you use the Affordable Housing Act? So under MFA's rules, we ask the county or municipality to create an affordable housing plan. We have a lot of resources to help you if you don't have a designated person in charge of housing, which we understand, but many municipalities don't have that bandwidth to have one dedicated staffer. So a lot of times a consultant is hired to develop the affordable housing plan, but we've tried to really put enough resources out there to make the process as painless as possible. One thing that we have heard is that once you do have an affordable housing plan, a lot of times you can end up using that data to apply for other federal grants. We know that a lot of communities use their affordable housing plan to then go out and seek different federal grants for infrastructure, wastewater, you name it. So you kind of can get multiple uses out of your affordable housing plan and the time spent on that. And then there's also, under the Act, is required for the county or municipality to pass and develop an ordinance. And again, we have a template for that ordinance, again, to make things easier. Both of those things must be submitted to MFA for review and approval. Before then, one of those kinds of donations can be made to what is considered a qualifying grantee. And we'll also talk about that. So there's 4 parts to the affordable housing plan. I'm not gonna, you can read those right there. One of the things that we have for communities is literally a checklist of everything that we're looking for in that affordable housing plan, as well as where you can get that information, again, to make it easier for you. And that must be submitted to MFA, and we review it, and we'll send you an approval letter before we ask you to go back to your legislative body and pass that. We also have an ordinance template out on our website, and again, talk about the steps for that. So the ordinance must be drafted, they send it to us, we review it, and give an approval letter, and then we ask you to take it back and have your local government body pass that, make any technical changes, and then we keep that all in our records. So qualifying grantee is an entity or organization that is eligible to receive the donation towards affordable housing development without, again, obviously running afoul of the anti-donation clause. And so those donations are made by the local government entity, usually through an RFP or a notice of available funding. Again, we have resources that can help you with the drafting of those. Eligible entities to receive donations, and under the Act, they're called qualifying grantees. It can be a qualified individual, although that's not usually the case. A qualified governmental housing agency, but any type of for-profit or nonprofit organization. And that's mainly who you would be working with, is bullet number 3 there. We do ask that the local government entity kind of do a beginning vetting process, if you will, and certify the qualifying grantee. And what that means is we just want to make sure we have well-intentioned actors coming into the affordable housing development space. And just because you certify someone as a qualifying grantee doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be awarded the project. But it is a good idea to have a few of them certified. You can keep having conversations with them, decide who you as the local government body feel comfortable in working with, and potentially keep the conversation going for local affordable housing development. A couple of helpful tips that I wanted to include, and we strongly encourage this collaboration. If your county has already done the heavy lift of the affordable housing plan, We really encourage our municipalities to work off of the county plan. A lot of times that's been a document that's been incorporated into their comprehensive plan. But you can use that if your county has already done that. And again, I have a list of the counties that have already done that process or on their way to that process. And so again, happy to be a resource for you on that. And then really the only thing, if your county already has an affordable housing plan that's passed, the municipality would just need to pass the ordinance. The other thing is your affordable housing plan doesn't really ever expire. As long as it's relevant to the current needs of your community or county, we say, there's no need for you to update it. But, obviously some of our communities are growing quite fast, and so that's when you may want to consider updating one if you do already have an existing one. So this is just a quick recap of that process. Again, just wanted to have it here as a reference slide for all of you. And again, we're happy to share this slide deck so that you can go back and look at it. But it's really that creation of a plan, us reviewing it, having your local body pass that in support, again, passing an ordinance as well, and then starting that process of seeking out for-profit and non-profit partners that might be considered a qualifying grantee. And that's when then you're finally eligible to make one of those donations and get going on the development. We, as soon as we get an affordable housing plan or an ordinance, try and do that review and turn it around within a week. So we don't want to drag out your process at all. We're here to be helpful and not put barriers in your way. So we really do try and make that turnaround time as quickly as possible to keep you going. Just a couple other slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to the housing development team. But these are common questions that we constantly get asked, and we just wanted to kind of establish the mindset before you are really ready to sit down and talk with these gentlemen in the Housing Development Division. So we often get asked, does MFA act as a developer? And so the question is no, or the answer I should say is no. MFA often provides some gap financing, but we're not directly responsible for creating the affordable housing development. And they're gonna really go in depth on how that process works and what these partnerships look like. We also often get asked, well, who are some developers out there in our state that might be good to work with? While we don't, as a matter of policy, recommend any one developer over another, I can tell you that if you go out to this link on our website, you'll see the successful applicants for the low income housing tax credit. And there will be some names that kind of come up over and over again, and you'll have a better idea of who is in this arena and space. And I think this list goes all the way back to 2001, if I'm not mistaken, on our website. And so then we also get asked, my municipality has an approved affordable housing plan and ordinance. What is my next step? And so that's where we wanted to bring along George and Tim to kind of take you through that next process. Here are some key questions that when you do get that affordable housing plan and ordinance process through, this is what developers are going to come in when you start having those conversations. They're going to want to know what incentives can the municipality offer to the developer, to the project. And that's really where the key part of the donation and the Affordable Housing Act comes into play. What we see most often is that the municipality either donates land or make sure that all the needed infrastructure is run right, ready to that development. It's usually one or the other, sometimes it's both, but that goes a long, long way in really reducing the project's debt load and costs up front. The other thing that I will tell you, again, this goes into the area of collaboration. go take your municipal map and also, sit down with your local school district and kind of see where you have maybe some land that is adjacent to each other. You really want to think about where some unused land might be that would make a desirable location for affordable housing. That's kind of on this next slide here. Is it land that's currently being, how's it zoned? What kind of amenities is it next to? Is the land or buildings ready to be developed or feasible to even be developed? Would we be willing to make those land or buildings available? And just the capacity. The other thing the developers will want to know, again, is providing or paying for the infrastructure, financing. Again, Tim and George will really go in depth on that. But, can you cobble together private, local, state, different funding to make the project work? And then where MFA usually comes in is providing that gap financing then for the remainder of the project. And abatement of any locally imposed fees. Obviously, most time we know in some communities there are developer impact fees. And again, if those can be waived or structured in such a way to make the project much more feasible, you'll have much more success. Also on our website, you can't see this very well, but we have a list of all our currently approved and what we call compliant government entities. It's both our list of counties and municipalities. So again, this is the list of municipalities, but I can definitely get that information for you to see if your county has already done the affordable housing plan on their end, in which case you as the municipality would probably just need to pass your ordinance. But we can talk through all that and work through that with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Great. Well, thank you, Julie, and good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Tim Martinez, and I am a Housing Development Supervisor with MFA. So today, George and I are going to cover what we're calling our Housing Development 101 portion of the presentation. And this is really kind of an adaptation of a presentation that George and I gave at our Housing Summit last year. And I think for that audience, we were kind of looking more to provide sort of just a very basic overview of the housing development process to maybe people who hadn't had any exposure to housing development concepts. So for this presentation, I think what we're trying to do is something maybe a little bit different, and I'll touch back on that point that Julie brought up, which is that what is MFA's role in all of this? What does MFA do? What MFA does not do is receive funding from the federal government and state government to then go out and directly develop affordable housing projects. The way that the units actually get on the ground, so to speak, is that we work through our housing development partners. So those are nonprofit partners, oftentimes for-profit partners, tribal entities, or sometimes local housing authorities. And really, I think the point is that without those developer partners, the housing simply does not get built. So I think today the point is to sort of outline the sort of basic affordable housing development process sort of from the perspective of the developer, because essentially they're the ones who are going to be taking on the brunt of the oversight of the project, the financial risk, and just the general coordination of the project. And I'd say that that the life cycle of these projects can be oftentimes we'll see 5 years or so. So that requires a lot of buy-in and expertise from the developer. So with that perspective in mind, I think that our collective role here, if we do want to see affordable housing created, is that we really want to try to remove barriers and reduce any types of risks where possible to help pave the way for those developers to come in and actually do the work. So with that being said, is that working? Oh, perfect. So, oh sure, that'd be great, George. So this is sort of the basic outline for our discussion today. We've broken it into 4 parts, sort of beginning with the early phases of the project. So that's due diligence and design and feasibility. And I will be covering that portion. And then we'll move into the financing and closing and construction phases. And that's really where the project starts to come together. So George will cover that portion. So as I mentioned, MFA works with partners to develop affordable housing, but outside of the developer and MFA, really any successful project is going to take a large number of people, from other housing and finance-related professionals to, of course, the end user, right, the tenant. So really, part of the point here is that it takes a village take notes, okay? It takes a village to build a village. And actually delivering a project, is a very collaborative process and can involve dozens of parties with a large array of different skill sets. And of course, you all fit in here as well. Any affordable housing development will need significant cooperation and partnership from the city and county. Perfect. So kind of moving into the due diligence phase, we're starting with the earliest phase of any project, and that is the sort of the initial program planning and concept phase. And when I say program, I really mean kind of the intersection between the physical housing development and the unique needs of that community. So the developer will have to determine what population it's serving, first off, and to answer that, they'll have to do a significant amount of research and understand things like the demographics of that area, the income levels in that area, and the primary economic activities in the area, probably among several other characteristics. And depending on the area, hopefully a lot of this work has already been done. Really developers should be able to contact the local planning office or other city staff who can hopefully supply information like a housing needs assessment or some kind of housing production plan. And that's really one area where it's critical that the municipality sets specific housing production goals. And are able to demonstrate to developers where the housing is needed and what that demand looks like. So you really want to be able to convey that you're supporting that developer in their mission. So you can go back really quick here, George, no worries. So once the developer is able to build a profile of that community, they can start to identify what the housing problems are that exist and which of those problems they're able to, are best equipped to and motivated to solve. And determining who is actually being served is going to naturally necessitate certain locational and design considerations. So in the case where the developer is going to maybe build in an area that's it serves mostly families with children, of course you're going to potentially want to be near schools. If you're serving a population that maybe is a special needs population or a senior population, access to healthcare facilities is going to be sort of your primary concern. And all of this is going to inform things ultimately like the building typology. So whether it's kind of a traditional stacked unit type of design or maybe detached units or townhome style units, as well as how many units are actually adequate to serve that population, as well as have the market demand to support them. Next slide, please. So with that sort of a site criteria established for that population, the developer would then look to identify and secure a parcel of land for the project. And as an affordable housing developer, this is really one of the largest hurdles. I think Julie touched on this a little bit, because you are competing with market rate developers who can afford much better real estate, since they're ultimately able to generate much higher incomes from those market rate rents. So inexpensive or challenging land is often where affordable housing get their beginning. And this is again where you all potentially can come in as part of your housing strategy. You can help to identify potential sites and utilize your local network to maybe even bring vacant landowners to the table. A good developer will want to establish a relationship with the municipality as early as possible in the development process. So the developer should be able to reach out to your planning department or local housing authority or maybe your assessor's office to see if there are any available parcels that would match what the developer is hoping to accomplish. And as the municipality, you might be able to dispose of city or county-owned properties. A prospective affordable housing developer likely will want to see if there's anything like land disposition RFPs or maybe affordable housing land making opportunities of that type in your area, because ultimately what you're trying to do is create a situation where there's favorable pricing or maybe an inexpensive long-term ground lease or something of that nature, because really what you're trying to accomplish is to inch that project close as possible to something that's financially feasible. So kind of moving on in the site evaluation process. So once the developer has a site in mind, they will need to assess the entitlements and access to that site. The developer in this case will be responsible for confirming that the property conditions and the descriptions on the title and any recent survey are actually correct and match. And really, this type of work is going to typically be done through title search, or that's usually done with the municipality or through a title company. And the developer will need to confirm certain things, like if the owner of the property is the sole property owner, and that the legal description matches what's actually being proposed in that sale. And they'll also want to ensure things like, is the site free of any financial or legal encumbrances or restrictions and easements that could potentially either prevent the developer from actually developing on that piece of land, or just make it extremely difficult or costly to do so. And lastly, access to utilities would be a critical component. So a property might have existing access to roads, but maybe not access to public water or sewer. And without significant infrastructural work, that might not be possible. So the difference between on-site utilities and what kind of appears to be nearby utilities could really be the difference of a lot of money and delays in the construction timeline. So I think, as Julia mentioned, any help in that regard could be significant as well. On the site evaluation, so the developer will, of course, check to see if the land use and zoning of the site permits the type of project that they have in mind. So the developer probably will contact your local planning department and get a hold of any zoning maps, or obtain the residential code at the site, and look at any land use code that will determine things like permissible density, the floor area ratio, and setbacks that are required, as well as parking requirements. That's always a big one. And they're also going to want to look at adjacent uses in the area to see if the site is appropriately situated for that population. The developer is also going to want to understand the right-of-way infrastructure requirements. So they may need to pay for the improvements to walkways or road access points that are part of that development. And this is another major area where, as a municipality, you'll want to ensure that the land use regulations and permitting processes are actually in line with your housing goals. At MFA, we will frequently hear about how the zoning variance and permitting and inspections process can really be a major barrier and a costly barrier to affordable housing developers. So if your goal is to increase affordable housing production in your community, I think one of the major areas to look at is any potential improvement or streamlining to that process that would make it easier and quicker. So moving into environmental due diligence. So at this phase, the developer is looking to see if there's any evidence of any environmental hazards or other conditions at the site that might hinder that development. So the developer will want to look for things like any historical structures and materials that have been at the site that maybe would suggest there have been hazardous contaminants, or even adjacent sites, since a site that's adjacent can still leak pollutants onto your site. So that's one important aspect. And other concerns can involve protected wildlife and plant life. Checking for existing wetlands and sensitive habitats could be a critical aspect, since it's possible that a portion or all of your land can't be developed on, or at least it potentially risks litigation. You'd also want to check for the FEMA flood map and see that the site is not sitting on a dangerous flood zone, or potentially part of the site is potentially has a risk for flooding. And in reality, most of this information is going to be uncovered from what's called a Phase 1 environmental assessment, which a certified firm will be hired by the developer to perform. And typically, MFA is going to require a Phase 1 development for any financing that goes into a project as it is. But I do want to just end this slide by noting that land with environmental issues might be less desirable to market rate developers, but really might be a point of leverage to affordable housing developers. And that's because sometimes it's really in the municipality's best interest to assist with any kind of environmental remediation that might be required. You might have a blighted or brownfield type of site or infill type of site that really will otherwise sit undeveloped unless the municipality actually offers something up to help clean up that area. So this is just another area where the city can actually come in and create opportunities to lower the cost of the development. So at this point, we're kind of assuming that the developer has selected a site and all the due diligence that's necessary has been completed. And now they can kind of begin to fill in the outline of the development concept. So they'll start to think more about what is feasible on the site and what's realistic for the capacity of the site. So they'll start to pencil out things like how many units can go on the site, what the site can actually accommodate in terms of the unit mix and size, how much space can be dedicated to community rooms and amenities, and what the configuration of any outdoor or landscaping space might be. And they're also going to need to verify that the now kind of more complete concept is met by adequate market demand in the area. And really the main way of doing this is ordering a market study from a professional firm, and that's going to assess the feasibility of the project, and of course the ability for the project to successfully lease up within the first year of operation. That's one very important metric that we look at. And this last bullet point I'd say is critical. At this stage, I think, or probably, hopefully even earlier, any smart developer is really going to want to begin building community support for the project. And one of the largest barriers, I think Julie touched on this as well, for affordable housing is community opposition, unfortunately. So conducting outreach and getting the community involved as early as possible would be an extremely important step. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, I think, inaccurate stigmas surrounding affordable housing, and it can be a very misunderstood topic by the public. So I think this is another area where local government can actually step in and try to dispel any negative stereotypes by really trying to educate the public that, of course, there's positive aspects of creating high quality, affordable housing in your community, and it plays a critical role in things like, your local economy as well. So kind of moving on with the design and feasibility phase here, the developer now has this kind of concrete development concept, and now they're going to potentially approach an architecture firm and create a preliminary site and building design. Ideally, they'll probably want to work with an architect that understands affordable housing and probably has similar experience on similar projects and maybe even in the area that the development's going to go. And that architect will then be able to take that concept and much further optimize the building and unit configuration, and they will produce preliminary building designs and floor plans, which are just kind of some small examples of. And I'll put emphasis on preliminary because it's likely that the developer and the architect are going to go back several times and go through several iterations of the design concept before they actually land on something final. And if MFA has funding in the project, the architect will also ensure that the design is in compliance with MFA's mandatory design standards, which really is intended to kind of create a minimal threshold for quality of the building. And from there, we're moving into the project financing component, and I'll let George take over.
Good morning, everyone. George Maestas, Director of Housing Development for MFA. And I'm going to pick up where Tim just left off and talk about how affordable housing projects are financed. And so we'll kind of talk about a typical housing development, affordable housing development project. So once you know what you're going to build and where you're going to build it, you're going to develop a budget, right? You're going to see how much it's going to cost to build what you've envisioned. And the first step in that is to kind of engage an architect. And I know Tim just mentioned that. What you want to do here first is you want to talk about the types of materials, types of finishes that you're hoping to include in the project. And we all know that right now that construction materials are very volatile, so what you want to put in a project may not end up being what goes into the project, but at least you have a starting point. So you'll meet with the architect, you'll just discuss those finishes, and then the architect's going to go back, he's going to take what you talked about, and they're going to complete what we call preliminary site and building design. And then you're going to take that design and you're going to either, if you already have a relationship with the general contractor, or perhaps you need to establish a relationship with the general contractor, you'll do that. And in some cases, we have developers that have been doing this for 20 years and they already have those relationships established. And when they're putting together these budgets, they'll refer to several different GCs to try to figure out what those costs might be in today's world. And then you also might use historical data from other projects. If you're a developer that brings in a project once a year, you kind of know what certain things cost. So you can bring in some of that historical knowledge into building that development, your total development budget. For some developers that maybe are new or inexperienced, they may want a consultant to come in on the project. I can tell you that sometimes we have very experienced developers that still bring in consultants to help them put these projects together. So consultants can be valuable when you're trying to develop your budget for a project. And so what we're trying to get at is what we call at MFA, or what the projects call their total development cost budget. It's just all of the costs. It's every soft cost. It's the legal fees. It's the construction hard cost. It's any kind of developer fee. It's all of the costs that it would take to put this project on the ground. And so once you've got a total development cost budget prepared, I mean, this is what we think this project is going to cost to build from start to finish. You'll then start to kind of take some of that other information that Tim mentioned, like who are you serving, how many units are you building, and you'll start to calculate the annual rents, and that's your income for the project, right? And let's not forget that if you're an affordable housing project, you are accepting lower rents, which means you are getting less revenue, right, than your neighbor across the street who might be a market rate apartment complex. But guess what? You have the same expenses. In fact, you might even have a little bit higher expenses. So that's where trying to determine what that net operating income is. And do I have enough net operating income? Is this project feasible? Thanks. So then the next step is, once you think you've gotten to a point where you've got positive NOI, you want to go out and secure funding, and that starts with a first mortgage loan. Again, not MFA here. This is going to be a traditional financial institution, a bank, or there are actual institutions that specifically fund affordable housing. But you want to go out, and they are going to look at your project, and they're going to run a pro forma, and they're going to decide what's the largest loan that they're comfortable with lending this project. And it's going to be based on two major things. It's going to be based on the loan to value, so the size of the loan to the value of the project, and the loan to cost. So the loan to value is usually based on a cap rate applied to the NOI, and the loan to cost is how much loan to the cost of the project. And that's going to be a limiting factor into how much a bank or a financial institution is going to be able or willing to lend this affordable housing project, right? There's also two types of first mortgages that you want to think about a little bit. You want to think about your construction loan versus your permanent loan. Sometimes it's the same lender, very often it's not. Very often you have a different construction lender who wants to get paid off when the project is completed and converts to perm. So, like I say, very often those are two different lenders, so you have to kind of get approval for two different loans, a construction loan and a permanent loan. The permanent first mortgage loan needs to be in place before the other funders want to talk to this developer about them putting their piece of the financing in. So, permanent first mortgage is critical to your other funding. Lenders are going to want to know what that NOI is for the project, that net operating income, again, just the difference between your revenues and your expenses, to see how much debt that the project can service. And that's called the debt service coverage ratio. And it's very important, and everybody's very concerned with that when you're trying to secure financing. The next piece is kind of where MFA comes in. These are the low-income housing tax credits, and many of you may be familiar with what those are. We call them LIHTC in our world. But they were created through an IRS program that was when IRS created the Tax Reform Act of 1986. They included these LIHTCs. And in New Mexico, the LIHTC program is administered by MFA, and we're the state housing agency. So I think generally in most states, the state housing agency are the ones that administer that program. The purpose is to stimulate private investment into affordable housing. And very basically, how does that happen? The tax credits are sold to an investor, and that investment, that cash, is equity that goes directly into a project and lowers the need for debt, right? The more cash that goes into the project, the less loans that project needs to go out and apply for. So again, mechanism, investors fund the projects by purchasing the tax credits, generally for pennies on the dollar. Right now we're looking at about 86 cents, I think, what we're seeing in our world. Saw it a lot higher a couple of years ago. But if you think about it, dollar for dollar exchange, if you have a dollar's worth of federal tax liability, but you're only paying 86 cents for that, and then you extrapolate that out to millions of dollars, it's very valuable to certain entities, organizations that have high amounts of federal tax liability on an annual basis. Right now, the scale, or for 2023, the scale is $2.75 per capita. And if you kind of take our estimated population last year at 2.1 million, multiply that by the $2.75, that means MFA received $5.8 million approximately in low-income housing tax credits. I'm going to reiterate, that doesn't mean it's $5.8 million in cash into a project. It's discounted by the sales price, but it is extremely helpful. The other thing I kind of skipped over just above there is that dollar for dollar credit, those tax credits are received over 10 years. So I'll show you an example here in a minute, but if you get $1 million in tax credits, you're awarded $1 million in tax credits, there's $1 million for 10 years, so it's $10 million in tax credits. And I'll show you an example here in a second. The credit amount that is awarded to a development project is really based on what we call eligible basis. So remember that total development budget I talked about? Not everything on that budget is eligible basis. Most of the hard construction costs and acquisition of the property can be included, but there's other things that are ineligible. So when we are calculating how much tax credits a project may qualify for, it's based on eligible basis. There's two types of tax credits. There's the 9% and the 4%. Usually when we're talking about tax credits in general, we're referring to the 9%. That's the $5.8 million I just talked about. But there are 4% tax credits that work slightly differently. MFA offers both 9% and 4% tax credits. I'm not sure that all states offer the 4%. The 9% are competitive. We have an annual application round, and so right now it's in January. It's been in February since I've been around, but right now we accept applications in January. It's only one time a year. Our department kind of stops what we're doing and we score these applications, and the applications that rise to the top, if you will, start going through an underwriting process and an approval process that currently lasts all the way until May, and we will take the final step in our approval process is taking our recommended projects to the board in May. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes till we get there. Let's see, the competitive. For the 9% LIHTC, states do receive just a limited amount per year, and again, between 5 and 6, we were 5.8 last year. And the 9% LIHTC has the most value. It provides the deepest subsidy. It can fund up to 70% of a total development cost of a project. So that's huge. That's a lot of money that doesn't have to be borrowed because it comes in as equity from the sale of those tax credits. The 4% are non-competitive. They're what we call as of right with the use of tax-exempt bonds. So if a project goes to the State Board of Finance and they're approved bond cap for the private activity bonds, the LIHTCs, the 4% LIHTCs are as of right. They come along with that. Now MFA does do a review a bit of the application before it goes to State Board of Finance to make sure the project's feasible, blah, 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 but non-competitive, so a little easier to get. The downside, if there's a downside, it doesn't fund quite as much. It funds about, the 4% fund about 30% of what project's total development cost. Still good, it's about a third. This is just a little information on the LIHTCs. If you are a developer who applies for low-income housing tax credits with MFA, and this is a federal requirement, by the way, you have to elect one of these three set-asides. You either have to elect that you'll have 20% of your units eligible for tenants earning no more than 50% of the area median income. That area median income is per county, and it's set by HUD annually. Then you can alternatively elect 40% of your units to serve 60% AMI, and that's the most common. In fact, almost every project we see, that's the election that they choose. It's just easier to hit and still have a feasible project. And then finally, there's a new option. This is the last couple of years, this has been available. It's the average income. So it allows the developer or the project to serve households up to 80% of area median income, as long as the 40% of the total units are restricted to an average of 60%. So it allows for some higher earning units, if you will, as long as it averages out to 60%. There was some ambiguity with the IRS and the rules for a little while there, and so developers were kind of timid. They didn't really want to elect that one, even though it seems like it might be a good option. IRS cleaned up some of their language in the regulations last year, and so I expect to see more projects coming in with the average income election. And then finally, what's the catch? Well, whether it be the LIHTCs or some of the gap funding I'm gonna talk about here in a second, with every program that MFA has, we file what's called a land use restriction agreement with the county for that particular program. And they go out anywhere from 30 to 40 years. In fact, there's some older ones out there that are 45 years. And that means that they're filed just like our mortgages, and it restricts that property from being able to rent those units, and again, it just depends on the program, above a certain income level. And even if the project sells, that land use restriction stays out there. So that's kind of how we enforce compliance with maintaining that project. And I know we hear a lot from people, even municipalities, what if we donate land to affordable housing project, and then once we give them the land and they build the property, what if they just turn around and make it market? They can't when we file these LURAs. I've seen projects with 5 land use restrictions on them. This is how we keep them in compliance. And alternatively, we have a department, a very large department, maybe the largest department at MFA, that's what they do. They go out and monitor compliance on these projects for years. They go out every year. So just want to mention that. Let's talk a little bit about the structure. Generally, when someone or a developer comes in to borrow money or apply for LIHTC, they create a partnership. It's usually a triple LP, limited liability, limited partnership. Sometimes it's a limited liability partnership, and every once in a while, it's just an LLC. But either way, there's the partnership or LLC, and then there's 2 pieces to it: general partner and limited partner. The general partner is usually the developer. They're the managing member. They also provide guarantees to the lenders, but they own a very small piece of it, 0.01%. Right? The limited partner, that's the investor. That's the bank or whomever came in to buy those LIHTCs, 99.99% ownership. So they, for all intents and purposes, own the project. Right? The limited partner gets its return almost entirely from the benefits that you would get from the tax credits, right? They offset their tax liability for cents on the dollar, right? They also get to take advantage of other things like losses, depreciation, and in the case of banks who need Community Reinvestment Act credits, CRA credits, they can also take those CRA credits on these if they get the LIHTC. Finally, equity from the sale of the credits, it does reduce the need for debt, right? Every bit of cash that goes in means that's $1 less that you have to apply to a bank for financing and less debt that you have to service. What does that mean? It means that a project can receive lower rents because they have less debt to service. They don't need so much income to service the debt. Oh, I gotta get rolling. Super well, but the example is if a project came in and they were awarded $1 million of tax credits and the investor paid 86 cents on the dollar for those tax credits, that project would receive $8,600,000 in equity from that investment. The last piece you want to think about is the gap. And I'll explain really quickly the gap. You have a first mortgage loan, you have LIHTC equity, and you have down here, you have your total development cost. There's sometimes a gap between what the equity and the first mortgage loan and is compared to what your total development cost is. That's the gap. And that's where we have some projects, some programs that will help fund that gap, right? So the low rents mean you're probably gonna have a gap. The reason the low rents mean you have a gap is because you can only get so much of a loan with those lower rents. So you determine what your gap is. Many times a project will have 5 or more sources, which includes those gap funding programs in there. Each program that we offer does have its own rules and constraints, so you want to know what those are. Talk to us about those. And then often, like Tim mentioned, you're going to go back and forth a few times before you get the project to work by adjusting, number of units and rents and all that stuff. And then the application for gap funding, it generally comes in with a LIHTC application. Sometimes we get funding applications that come outside of a LIHTC application, but it's the same universal application that we request to underwrite that and try to get it awarded. Here's 3 examples of programs that MFA offers for gap funding. We've got HOME. It's not an acronym, it's Home Investment Partnerships. It's a federal program. We've got the National Housing Trust Fund, which is another federal program that comes through HUD. And we've got the New Mexico Housing Trust Fund, that's state funding. And some of you may have heard that we are, this is the first year that we are receiving recurring funding from the state of New Mexico in that program. And so it's going to be very helpful going forward. Here's other examples of gap financing. Deferred developer fee, where the developer doesn't take all their fee up front. Developer or contractors can contribute or provide soft loans to the project. There are other types of tax credits available. Right now, you're hearing a lot about solar tax credits and other energy efficient tax credits, and also historic tax credits are available. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas offers something called an AHP grant. And that, I think they can grant up to $800,000 per project. You have to apply for it. You're not guaranteed it, but there's a lot of money out there. And then kind of going back to what Julie was saying, city or county contributions that are made under the Affordable Housing Act, extremely helpful. If cities have money to donate, or if you're a small municipality and you don't have money, but you have land, donate it, help incentivize those developers to come in. Let's see, so let's just talk about those local government contributions. Again, land, if there are impact fees that can be waived, property tax abatement, generally in the case of 4% LIHTCs, we see that. Infrastructure contributions, again, bringing that infrastructure into the site at the cost of the municipality and not the developer. Any low interest rate loans, grants, or soft loans, cash flow loans. Also very helpful to these projects that just don't have a lot of income. Here's a capital stack example. Here's your first mortgage loan up on top. Then you have 3 examples of MFA gap funding. Then you'll see the 5th mortgage is a developer cash flow loan, city soft loan. There's a county grant in there. There's the big one, which is the tax credit equity down there at $15 million. A little deferred developer fee, which is really not a source, let's be honest. It's really just a deferral of cost, but because it's a deferral of cost, you're pushing it out, it looks like a source. And all that there, the $37,800,000, I think is what it says, that should be the amount of your total development cost. Those are all the sources that you might see in a typical capital stack to get that project funded. Oh, I think we're out of time. Closing construction. Once all the financing is in place, you're gonna start closing calls with all of the partners, and that's attorneys, lenders, tax credit investor, title company. They're gonna meet together. There's the loan documents are going to be negotiated. Once everybody agrees on what they say and they're good with it, documents are fully executed through the title company. Initial draws occur at that closing. The construction period is usually about 24 months. We've seen it drag out a little bit recently with just everything that's going on, but usually about 24 months still. And MFA does monitor the construction process, so we go out, we have somebody on staff that is our architectural services rep. They go out, they look at the project at 33% completion, 66% completion, and then they'll go out there for a final inspection and make sure the project is built as it was supposed to be. And then once the project is complete, the final draws are made. The permanent financing will pay off any construction financing the project may have. All of the amortizing loans begin with their monthly principal and interest payments. The project is called placed in service. That's a LIHTC term, but it means it's occupied now, placed in service. And that final LURA, which is the LIHTC LURA, is recorded at that time. The others are recorded at closing. And then 8609 is just the form that the developer will submit so they can get their tax credits. The project is now complete. And what happens is Housing Development, our department, will turn that project over to our asset management department that I mentioned earlier. Asset management will take care of the long-term compliance. And like I said, that can go out 40 years, where they go out annually and take a look at that project. Make sure they're renting to the right populations. Make sure that the housing is still safe, that there are no concerns like broken stairs and holes in walls and leaky roofs and all of that stuff. That's what our asset management department does. So, sorry, I know I took us a little over. I just want to reiterate the fact that if you are a municipality and you are interested in having affordable housing developed in your city or your county, please collaborate with the county. It's good to have that relationship. It makes things go smoother, right? And if there's anything you can do to help incentivize a developer to come into your area, and like I said, that's donations, grants, loans, land, infrastructure. Please do that. That's what we're seeing being successful in the state, is these municipalities that want to do that, want to incentivize those developers to come in. And that's all I have, and I know we probably don't have time for questions, but I'm willing to hang out.
Is the PowerPoint going to be available for us?
I believe so. Yeah, I will make that
share it. Yeah, you can reach out to me or directly to MFA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're happy to give it to all of you.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Briefly, just real quick, appreciate it. So it sounds like if you're a municipality thinking about putting something forward and putting the best foot forward with developers, the application process is coming up in January, ends in May. So we need to start planning now. In the criteria for the application for LIHTC, are there any more weighted areas for scoring than others that we need to be aware of or thinking about?
Our application process is pretty substantial. There is a section that for scoring. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that there's more weight to. But that application is available at any time. One little piece of clarification: the applications are due in January. Really, there's a window between December and January where those applications are accepted. After that, it's all underwriting what's received. Yes, back there. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, good morning and thank you for the presentation. I'm Claire Burrows with Review Bonus. Can you use LIHTC for rehabbing existing affordable housing, or what other funding sources are there for rehab existing affordable housing?
Great question. The question of whether or not you can use LIHTC for rehabilitation of affordable housing. Absolutely. It can be used for new construction or acquisition rehab of an existing project. Has to be rental in order to use the low-income housing tax credits, but absolutely it's the best tool to use for the rehabilitation of those existing projects. We do have some other funding sources. We've got a new program called the Preservation Loan Fund that is a much smaller amount available, but for certain projects that just need some rehabilitation and don't want to go through the competitive process, Preservation Loan Fund is maybe what you want to look at, and that's available on our website.
I just want to share that the general session is starting at 11:45, but it sounds like George and Julie and Tim are willing to hang out.
We're just gonna hang out in here, guys, so if you guys wanna talk to us anymore, please come up, and we've got cards, and happy to talk to anybody.
And thank you so much. Please join me in giving a round.
Thank you all. Thank you.